Greetings, everybody. Welcome back after spring break. Hope everyone had at least a certain amount of fun and relaxation, even if you didn't do anything super huge. Of course, if you did do something super huge, I hope it was memorable and great. We've got 6 weeks left in the semester and 2 units to get through. And so this week we're starting on Unit 3, which is a continuation of our analysis of short fiction, but we're adding a research component to this assignment. And the way we're going to use this research is contextual criticism. And what does that mean? What is contextual criticism? So up to this point in the semester, everything that we've done with texts, both poetry and short fiction, has been dealing with the text itself, where we have been analyzing a text purely based on its own sort of organic unity and literary elements. The goal has been to kind of, get used to reading between the lines, seeing how literature functions as an art form, as a intact entity in and of itself. And so, the typical thing is to, with poetry, speak about the experience being created, or with short fiction, speaking about the thematic commentaries that the work is dealing with, and then using narrative POV, speaker voice, symbolism, characterization, plot structure, setting, all these different types of literary elements to sort of supplement a discussion of the story's thematic commentaries, whatever that may be. When we're talking about contextual criticism, what we're doing is exploring those themes in a much broader context, in a more real-world context, to not just show how certain, human elements may affect what happens in a piece of fiction, just to sort of show what the work is saying, but also to, delve into the context of the time and place that work was created. It's still kind of dealing with a text, reading it, and searching for those thematic conversations, but rather than just sort of talking about how the setting or certain things are symbolic of that thematic idea, or how characters exemplify that through the things that they say and do. We are branching outwards into the world around the work to sort of say, if we're dealing again as an example with Kate Chopin's Story of an Hour, within the context of the story itself, the text itself, we can pretty easily get to distilling the idea that the story is about women who feel, or one particular woman, and the tendency for women in traditional marriages where they are expected to be subservient to men, to feel that they don't have any agency, to feel that their lives are not their own, that they always have to do what someone else wants them to because of simply the power dynamic that exists in that kind of traditional man and wife relationship. When we're using research to help bolster our discussion about that, then we can go into discussion of the actual Victorian era to sort of show how what Louise Mallard goes through is something that a lot of women at the time faced. We can also, 125 years later, that institution, that style of marriage is still one that a lot of women find stifling in that same way. And so we can use research of modern marriage to speak about how these things are still going on. These are limitations that women in this position still feel. Or we can, change what we're looking at entirely and focus on the economy of it, and talk about how what Louise Mallard is going through both then and now is kind of atypical. The idea that your husband dies, the provider of your life dies, and that means you're free, is a feeling that a lot of women, most women I would say, wouldn't feel necessarily. They're not as well off as Louise Mallard, where they can just lose a husband and lose their income and be fine for the rest of their lives. There's millions of women in the world where if the husband dies, that means hardship for them, and we can use that kind of research, that kind of knowledge to help further our discussion of the text. In the notes for this week, I sort of talk about the difference between a lens text and a focus text. The focus text in that instance would just be story of an hour. It's the text we're focusing on. But the lens that we look at it through could be, Victorian era gender roles. It could be the state of modern marriage. It could be the financial reality of widowed women. It could be anything that we really want, as long as it's sort of germane to that conversation and that thematic commentary. I also posited in the notes that this kind of thing, this idea that you're using one text to kind of guide and shape what you see in another one, is something that you've already done as a student at Pellissippi. If you've taken English 1010, if you take Composition 1, which everybody did since you're in English 2, then you probably did a rhetorical analysis essay where you were looking at the ethos, pathos, logos, the logical appeals, the emotional appeals, the use of evidence, the display of character, the personal touches of authors to sort of talk about, how all these things work together to make a piece of rhetoric, an essay, or a speech persuasive. And essentially, that's the same thing. You are using the ideas of ethos, pathos, logos, even if you didn't use those words, but you're using the idea of those kinds of rhetorical appeals to dictate what it is you speak to about the text. And it alters what it is that you see in the text. A speech or an essay might, evoke ideas of cute little puppies, or fear mongering, if things don't go our way, the world is going to end, basically. And that may be something that you just sort of mention as part of a summary, but knowing what pathos is means that you can point to those things and go, see, this is a moment where the author is trying to manipulate or convince us or persuade us some way, somehow. That is essentially contextual criticism. That is, you may not have even talked about Aristotle's rhetoric, but those ideas of persuasive elements come from a text. And so in many ways, you have already done this kind of assignment without even knowing it. And so we're going to, this week, just sort of practice a little bit of that, a little bit of using research to help shape our discussion of a text. And so that text is going to be Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper, which is a story many of you may have encountered before. It's a very popular story to put in textbooks. It serves well for our purpose here, because in addition to Gilman's story, I'm also going to ask you to look at a couple of excerpts from two books written by a doctor named Silas Ware Mitchell, who was, in real life, in the late 1800s, a doctor who specialized in treating hysterical women and was actually Charlotte Perkins Gilman's actual doctor in real life when she was diagnosed with just emotional hysterics and exhaustion, and she wrote the story in response to the treatment that she received from him. And so, just to sort of set the stage for a little bit, one primary concern in the excerpts you'll read from Mitchell, and I'll put the page numbers and the links for that all in the list of things to do this week for the assignment. I'm not asking you to read two whole books, but I am asking you to read several pages from those two books, wherein he talks about what makes women sort of exhausted. What is the cause of exhaustion? What is the cause of emotional hysteria, of course, which he basically describes as a moral failing that results from a woman who is attempting to do the same kind of work as a man, to be as active as a man. And he gives many examples of this, on down to the idea that, boys can go to school for 8 hours because they have the mental capacity to exert themselves mentally for 8 hours a day. But he just doesn't believe women have that same capacity. He He says, this is a quote, "It is making mischief to believe that women can do the kind of work that men do." And he sort of identifies a couple of things that he believes is sort of unique to our sort of own culture. At this time, America was still relatively new, and the idea of what the culture was in America was just starting to crystallize a little bit. And it's important to recognize that he equates this to morals. He as a doctor believes that women have a moral duty to perform, and essentially that is staying home, taking care of the kids, to not worry, to not exert themselves mentally or physically for any real reason. He believes that even exercising too much is bad for them. I mean, certainly trying to do the kinds of physical labor that men do for as long as men do, even if that physical labor is just, painting, learning an instrument, writing books, as in the case of Charlotte Gilman. Just any kind of mental or physical exertion is just bad for women, and the cause of their exhaustion, the cause of their hysteria. And it's important to remember also that this is a doctor who treats women. So however you feel about these issues, as somebody who is a medical professional in charge of treating women and women's health, to come at it with that framework is, at the very least, a little gross, shall we say. And this is not me. I'm going to ask you to read Silas Mitchell's actual words. So these are the words that he said, and then we're going to use our knowledge of what he believed about women and what he believed he could do to cure women, and use that to help shape our reading of Gilman's story, which is, on one level, a ghost story about a woman who, similarly being treated as she was by Silas Mitchell on the rest cure, as it became known, is sent out to a house that she believes is haunted. So that story, written as a response to the treatment she received from the doctor whose words you were going to read this week, that is more or less the focus of our work this week, just as sort of practice for the larger scope assignment of the essay. The discussion post is already up. I will indicate specific page numbers in those books. The story is available in your textbook. There is a reading quiz to go along with it. What is the goal of doing contextual analysis? The goal of all of this is to use stories as a means of examining the world around us, to treat stories as, artifacts of real life, as it were, and to see how stories can be used to explore broader society, and the issues that characters face in fictional stories are very much parallel to the kinds of things that real people deal with in the real world all the time. But rather than an examination of how subtextual elements can enhance our understanding of what the story is about, as it were, this time we're going beyond the story to talk about how the details of the story and what characters are going through and what the thematic commentary seems to be resonates with things that exist in our real world. And in order to do this, we need to do research as well. So we'll focus on those kinds of things next week. For this week, we're just sort of practicing the motions. Read Mitchell's words, read Gilman's story, compose your discussion post. Let me know if you have any questions. Always feel free to reach out. Welcome back. We've got less to go in the semester than we've been. By the end of this week, you won't need two hands to count the number of weeks we have left. So we're barreling towards the end. I'm going to get your essay number 2 graded as quickly as possible, so be on the lookout for that. In the meanwhile, welcome back. Enjoy week 10, and let me know if you need me.